My selfish sister-in-law got my husband, somehow, against my better wishes by the way, to spend our life savings that we had invested for our son's college fund on her stupid wedding. She wants this luxurious wedding. She doesn't even have her own job. Well, you know what? I might pretend that it's okay, but deep down I'm plotting to do some sort of revenge.
Have you ever had your in-laws who were just hell-bent on enjoying your hard-earned money while they themselves just lazied about? Well, my sister-in-law Betty is such a leech, whose growing demands are getting crazier day by day. This time she's just gone extreme with her demands. It's really making me mad. So here I am, venting out my anger through the post so that I can actually think a sane way out of this without offending Betty or my husband's family. Let me introduce myself properly. So I'm Leah. And as I mentioned, my sister-in-law Betty wants my husband Jones to pay an insane amount of money for her dream wedding. As crazy as it sounds, the worst part about it is that Betty is acting like she's entitled to it. Well, let me provide you guys with some sort of context so that you can understand Betty's sense of entitlement. As you must have noticed, there's a complete 10-year gap between Betty and Jones. The reason being the few miscarriages my mother-in-law went through after Jones was born. My mother-in-law went through a lot of troubles before Betty was finally born. Basically, Betty was their last chance at having another kid at my in-laws, always wanting a daughter. So Betty was their miracle baby. You can imagine how pampered and loved Betty would have been all her childhood, and honestly, I don't even have a problem with it, until she started getting on my last nerve. As I said, Betty was the family favorite. She was pampered by all, especially Jones. Because of the huge age gap between the two, Jones had always seen Betty more as a daughter than a sister. He'd always pampered her with gifts and met all the demands. But I guess with time, Betty started taking advantage of her brother's love. From the moment Jones introduced me to Betty before our wedding some 19 years back, it was clear to me how close they were. Betty was just a teenager back then, so I actually found this sibling bond very cute. Jones used to pamper Betty just like his own daughter, and I obviously had no problem with this. Initially, I also got along with Betty pretty well, as she was just a kid back then. Then the first major problem arose when, after a year, my son Isaac was born. It was a joyous time for all of us, and I guess even Betty was happy to be welcoming a new family member into her life. But after a few years, as Betty grew up, her love for Isaac started turning into jealousy and bitterness. She started growing jealous of Isaac as she felt that her brother now gave more attention to Isaac. But that was not the case. Through the years, as Betty was growing up, Jones was still the loving brother, pampering her with love and gifts and making sure that all her demands were met. But maybe Betty's expectations were a lot more than that. However, I did not think much of all the tantrums that she threw about Jones not giving her enough attention at the time, since Betty was just young, entering into her college life. Though I did have a few arguments with my in-laws about the same, because Betty was filling their minds with the idea that I was trying to steal their son and break the family. Obviously, there was nothing as such. Jones was still available for his family all the time, and I must give it to my husband for handling his family well, along with the new responsibilities of providing a good education to his son. Along with Isaac's education, Jones was also sending money to Betty, so that she can have a good college life, but all of that never seemed enough for her, and we'd still find her bitter at family dinners talking about how her brother never paid attention to her. This just made Jones feel guilty, and he started doing more things for her. From Jones' point of view, he never differentiated between Betty and Isaac, but clearly that was not a perspective that Betty shared. So things went on like this for some time, but they eventually got better when Betty finally landed a job. But her having a job did not mean that she stopped leeching off my husband. She would still demand expensive gifts from my husband, but things were a lot better than before when Betty solely relied on Jones for the money. Even Jones started cutting off a few of her expenses as he thought that she was doing well in her life now, and honestly, it was a relief. I thought she was earning well since I noticed that her friend circle almost consisted of rich people from posh societies. She'd go on to fancy events such as expensive wine testing and stuff like that with her rich friends. She'd go shopping with them and buy lots of branded expensive stuff. I was happy for her. She was doing well in her life, but I was even happier for myself and Jones since she was almost off of our backs now. So 2 months back, when she announced her engagement with her boyfriend of 1 year, everyone was genuinely happy for her. That was until last night when she dropped the bomb on us that she wanted Jones to pay for her extravagant dream wedding. Last night we were having a celebratory dinner. celebrating Betty's engagement and Isaac's soon-to-come-to-home high school graduation, and everyone, including her fiance, was present there. We were having a good family time, chatting about the upcoming weddings and about the Ivy League colleges Isaac had applied to, when my mother-in-law asked Betty if she had selected a date and venue. Betty just casually replied that all of the wedding preparations depended on Jones right now. Both Jones and I were utterly confused. So, when I asked Betty to clarify what she was talking about, she just casually answered that she will only start planning her wedding when Jones provides the funds for it. It was crazy how easily she asked Jones to pay for the wedding, so it would be an understatement if I said that we were shocked. Even Jones could not hide his shock and asked her what the hell was this all about. That's when the spoiled Princess Betty threw one of her infamous tantrums, where she emotionally blackmailed Jones, asking if he treated her like a daughter more than his sister was, all a lie. This one taunt hit Jones like a lightning bolt, as he was all quiet after that, and this made me furious. We didn't have that type of money that we could just casually spare thousands of dollars for Betty's dream wedding. Jones' silence was just making Betty more confident that she would get that money from us. So I put the argument forward that we did not have that type of money to give her. She just gave me a nasty look, and then she suggested the craziest thing possible. I'm so furious that my husband is even considering it. You can imagine my anger, because the next thing that came out of Betty's mouth was that we could give her the education fund that we've been saving into for years to pay for Isaac's college. I lost my mind at that. We had been cutting off luxuries to give our son a chance at a good education, while this girl was busy using everyone expensive stuff she saw in the market, and now she wanted us to give that money to her just because she wanted her dream wedding. Well, this was insane, and this was literally the craziest level of her entitlement. I refused it straight to her face, and I wasn't gonna let my son suffer at the expense of her having her dream wedding. But from the look on my husband's face, it was crystal clear that he was considering doing it. Betty tried to guilt trip him even more, talking about how he had always promised to ensure that she'd have everything she wanted in the world. But Jones still debated about Isaac's education. I was happy he at least kept himself sane enough to think about his son. But then Betty came up with another crazy idea, and this seems to have won my husband completely over. Betty talked about how Isaac is a bright student and can even get a full scholarship, so we won't have to pay a dime for his college fee. But if Jones turned her down at that moment, she would regret this thing for her whole life, as one gets married only once and she deserves to have a dream wedding. She even muttered that it was his responsibility as a brother to ensure that for her. I mean, it's crazy. I know, but my husband, being an emotional man, blinded by the love for his sister, asked her for a week's time so that he could think thoroughly about all this and consider funding her wedding. I couldn't believe the words that came out of his mouth, like, did this man not consider his own son? Hearing this from my husband felt like a victory to Betty. She knew that she would be able to get into her brother's mind and would actually convince him by the end of the week. So this is the crazy dilemma that I'm in right now, guys. Oh boy. I'd be damned if I allowed my husband to pay the whole education fund that we set for my son for his sister's wedding. We can't just solely rely on the possibility of Isaac getting a scholarship. So this is the thing that brought me here. How do I convince my husband to not give a single penny to this leech of a sister? Or is there any other way out of this whole thing? I would love to hear your opinions and suggestions on this entire mess. So tell me, what can I do now? Update number 1. Hey guys, it's been a week since my initial post and I'm back with yet another crazy update. So guess what? Yeah, the thing I was scared about just happened. Betty was able to convince Jones to pay for the wedding, and as you can imagine, I'm furious. But before we get into that, I want to reply to a few comments from you guys. Firstly, I just wanted to thank the people who supported me. Doing the right thing, allowing my sister-in-law to leech off of us is wrong. I really needed that reassurance from somebody because in my family it's all been a mess. So your support means a lot. Now, coming to the people who feel that I'm unnecessarily meddling in the whole thing and I should not interfere in the matters of siblings. As John's wife, I have all the rights to tell him what's wrong and, what's right for me and him. Secondly, I myself would not have interfered if there was just a simple matter between siblings. It's not. It's my son's education on the line and the funds both of us saved are involved. I agree that Joan's contributing the larger part of the education fund, but that still doesn't mean that it can all be splurged on his sister's extravagant wedding. Now, coming back to the point, Betty was able to completely guilt-trip Jones into agreeing to her demands. She left no stone unturned to exploit the emotions and love my husband had for her, and as a result, my husband conceded. I was disappointed, but I could not do anything about it. It just did not sit right with me that Betty and her fiance were having their dream wedding without even spending a dime, while we were just spending our son's education fund that we had saved for so long. So, I tried to talk to Betty about the whole thing, as you guys suggested. I did it in Joan's presence, so that he could also see the logical reason in all this and go back into his decisions to pay. I asked Betty why was she making her brother pay for the wedding when her fiancé and she were all well off themselves. That's when Betty threw another crazy emotional tantrum, crying her eyes out, talking about how her fiancé and she did not have that kind of money and were just mere employees of the company they worked for. To back off her case, she also showed me their salary slips, talking about how they only got meager salaries and could not afford the wedding she wanted. That's why she asked her brother to pay, because apparently she knew her kind brother would never disappoint her. It all seemed like staged lines to me, but Jones was moved by all this, and this just made his mind more set on his decision. So now anything I said was useless, and Jones was set to spend the education fund on Betty's wedding. I was helpless in the situation. Although this all seemed like a futile attempt to convince my husband not to pay the money, it did pique my curiosity. Suddenly, my mind wandered to the expensive clothes and bags that Betty owned, and I remembered how she went to expensive things with her rich friends, and all of this simply did not make much sense to me. If Betty and her fiancé actually earned as much as she claimed to in those salary slips, then there's no way in hell that she could afford all of the luxuries, but still she had everything. Something did not add up. Betty might have shown those slips to us just to prove her point that she could not pay for the wedding herself, but all of this just made me suspicious. I knew if I said anything about the same to Jones, he would not believe it, blinded by his sister's love that he has. So I've decided to look into the whole thing. I don't know what I'm expecting to find, but if Betty actually does not earn that well, then where did all the money from the expensive gifts come from? I'm going to investigate a bit on my own, and I'll update you guys if I find out anything. Update number 2. Hey, I'm back. I think I might have hit the jackpot. It's been a few days since my last update where I mentioned how I have decided to look into the whole matter of how Betty had been affording all of those expensive things. And guess what? I actually found out the whole thing, and it's crazy. So the wedding preparations are going on in full swing, and as much as I hate it, I'm a part of it, helping Betty as my husband and mother-in-law. I would have said no to my husband's request for me to help Betty, but I just could not say no to my mother-in-law, since that woman has been nothing but good to me since the day that I got engaged to her son. She has supported me through everything all these years, though we did have our occasional fights due to Betty's tricks. So it just seemed disrespectful not to listen to her at the moment she needed me. That's why I agreed to help Betty with the preparation. Now, coming back to the point, a few days back I went to Betty's place and it's actually her fiance's. But Betty acts like she's the queen of the house. I went there to discuss something about the venue, but there I found one of her rich friends, Rose, sitting there talking about Betty, about how she had just lost her new branded bag. The bag sounded way too expensive, but Rose did not seem to care too much. She talked about how it's crazy that this thing has just been happening very frequently to all of them, but Rose just laughed and said maybe they are all just a bit careless, and Betty was just sitting there talking all animatedly, but I sensed a sort of hesitation from her side. I thought I was seeing things, or did Betty actually look nervous? So I decided to take this chance to dig more into Betty's luxurious lifestyle with her rich friends. When I sat there and asked Rose what she was talking about, she did not hesitate before telling me the whole thing about how from the past few months all of them, meaning Betty and her rich friends, had been losing their stuff randomly. Random expensive stuff like watches, bags, everything. And then she just continued to laugh and say that we might have kept them somewhere and forgot, since there's so many of them. But this came off as somewhat suspicious, if you ask me. I asked Betty if she also lost anything, and Rose answered for her that even Betty lost a few of her things, but I could still sense that hesitation and worry in Betty's expression. I just could not figure out why, and I knew there was something off with this whole thing. Soon after that, Rose left, and I stayed to discuss things with Betty, but she tells me that she had to go somewhere so that we could discuss it later. I left the house, but I knew I had to look more into the whole ordeal. I decided to wait for Betty outside her home, and when she got into her car, I decided to follow her. And you won't believe where this led me. Remember the bag that Rose said that she was missing? It turns out that Betty seemed to have the exact same branded bag. Yeah, you know what she did with it? When I followed her, I found her going to a shady marketplace. The whole market seemed suspicious, but Betty just casually went there like it was a walk in the park, and straight away went to a shop. I could see from the shop's window that Betty sold the bag to the owner and got a lot of money. To get evidence against her, I recorded it all. After leaving the place, I thought she would go back home. Oh no, she went shopping and bought herself a bunch of branded stuff that looked expensive. Right at that moment, it was clear to me that all of this was happening. The reason why Betty's friends were suddenly losing their stuff so randomly, right in front of my face, it was all pretty clear how Betty was affording these expensive items with that meager salary. She's been stealing from her rich friends and selling it for money, so she could just afford all those expensive stuffs and fit in with them. It all made sense. I guess Betty just wanted something to boast about with her new circle, and when she did not have what they had, she found the means to get it. I guess even this extravagant wedding was just to boast to her rich friends about all the money that she had. I bet they would not know that the complete wedding is being paid for by my husband. Well, I have a plan. Betty wants to boast, right? Well, I'll just give her the perfect thing to boast about. It'll be fun, I'm sure. Now, I just can't wait for Betty's wedding, which is in a few weeks, and I will update everybody about it. Update number 3. Hey, guys, well, I finally showed Betty her place. You won't believe how relieved I feel right now, and the whole thing is crazy. It just turned Betty's dream wedding into her worst nightmare. So it's been a few weeks since I last updated you guys, and it was Betty's wedding this morning. And you can't believe the crap show that it turned out to be. As I mentioned in my previous update, I had just found out the secret behind Betty's luxurious lifestyle, and honestly I could not believe the limits of craziness this girl would do just to keep up some fake standard. After finding the whole thing out, initially I planned on telling it to my husband. I had the evidence and I knew I could convince Jones about the whole thing and we could just get the wedding canceled. But half of the payment that we made was non-refundable, so canceling the wedding won't get us the money back. So I thought of something better for Betty. I did not tell Jones or any of the family members about it. I stayed shush until the wedding day, which was in the morning. I wanted to teach Betty a lesson. Today, all the guests were present in the venue, including Betty's rich friends. The one she stole from. What better opportunity could have been there for me to reveal what a liar of a thief Betty was? Once everything was settled and Betty was about to walk down the aisle, I started to show. Betty's fiance was already there at the altar and everybody waited for Betty. And right when Betty was about to come, I sent a video along with a text, "Check out your rich friend stealing and selling your stuff to all Betty's friends," including Rose. If you're wondering how I got their phone numbers, then I have Rose to thank for that. When I met her at Betty's house, I had asked Rose for the contact info of all the friends, since, I was planning a special invitation for them for Betty's wedding. All of this had happened when Betty was not there. So she knew nothing about it, and Rose was more than happy to help. Now, as I expected, those social media freaks were on their phone at the time when I dropped the bomb. And next, it just turned out as I planned. As soon as they realized what was Betty doing to them all these months, they just started getting restless. Talk about, good timing. Just then, Betty walks down the aisle. Well, it wasn't as much of a timing thing as it was my well-planned-out plan, LOL. Before Betty could even make it to the altar, her friends started shooting questions at her, asking what the hell this video was about, and if she's been stealing from them. Betty was taken aback, shocked at what to say next. It was crystal clear that this was not what she was expecting at her dream wedding. And the funniest thing happened when Betty did not just say anything and ran away. Yeah, she literally just ran away from the venue. My in-laws and husband tried to run after her, but they were too confused to even react. The next thing I did was clear out their confusion. I told everybody in the venue about what happened and the little stealing adventures that Betty has been having for some time. Everyone was shocked, especially Betty's fiance. When I asked him why he never suspected where Betty was getting all of this expensive stuff, he just simply answered that he thought Jones had gifted it to her. Poor guy. I won't say it was his fault that he could not look through Betty's shrewd nature. None of us expected this, but most of all, Betty's friends were going mad trying to call her again and text her. But she wasn't picking up. From the looks of it, they were not letting this betrayal go easily. None of us have heard from Betty since she ran away from the wedding venue this morning. We don't know where she went, but one thing I'm sure of is that she'll come back because she does not have any other place to go. Well, for the first time in my life, I'm waiting for Betty to come back. I want to see the drama that ensues when she's back, as Jones and my in-laws are pretty furious for the stupidity that Betty did. Let's just see what happens when she gets back. Final update. Hey guys, I know it's been a while, precisely a month since the last update, and a lot of stuff has gone down. I don't think this whole thing would have turned out to be this big, but for Betty, her wish for a grand wedding just took a crazy turn. As I expected that Betty would return, she did just that. She was back at our house before the sun rose the next morning. Until then, she knew that I was the one who did the whole thing, and she was furious at me. But she preferred to give me the silent treatment while I couldn't be happier. She tried to talk to her brother first, but Jones was absolutely too furious to even talk to her. She approached my in-laws next, and it was the same case with them as well. So the pampered princess of the family turned into an abomination for all of them, and they didn't want to talk to her. Even her fiance broke off the engagement and refused to marry Betty, as he could not marry a thief who has been betraying him right under his roof. So he had kicked her out, and even her parents and brother refused to help her, which resulted in her living in a crappy trailer that she's living in right now. And guys, to make matters worse, her friends, including Rose, they filed a report against her. Betty had stolen a lot of things from them, and now they wanted compensation for it. All of this went on for some days, and Betty found herself helpless in a crazy crapload of debt. She tried to turn again to her Jones and her family, who just ended up disowning Betty in their anger. As much as it hurts Jones, he was still adamant about cutting Betty off, completely because of how she had been playing with people. Anyways, lastly, I just want to thank you guys for all the support. Goodbye.